Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is the 4th of July. I am here in Brooklyn, outside my window. The sun is just starting to go down, and I am here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. We've got plenty to discuss this evening. Glad that you are here. So much to talk about today, so much happening in the world. My goodness, so many things we can talk about. Shout out to Nathaniel Adams, glad you're with us. Shout out to Lincolnite Yankee, glad you're with us. Shout out to Bob, glad you're here, Bob. Who else is with us tonight? So much that we can discuss. Dan Uko says, hey, Caleb. Well, hey, right back at you. What else is new, folks? So much that we can talk about. If you haven't done it, now is the time to subscribe. So hit that subscribe button. And to make sure that you find out about all these lives and videos, you need to hit that bell. There's that bell next to the subscribe button. You want to hit that so you get the notifications about what we're doing here. Because we're having a great time here. A lot of videos coming out, a lot of conversation been going on. Benjamin Franklin is here on this live. Wow, well, there you go. Infinita Salau says hello to me. Tyler Woodby says, hey man, been a while since I caught a live. Well, welcome, Tyler. Glad you were with us. So much that we plan to talk about this evening. Super Desmond 12 says hello. Well, hello right back at you. So much we can talk about. Ruben is here. Hello, brother. He says, hey, brother. Well, welcome, Ruben. Old Gringo is here. He says, hola. Well, hola, old Gringo. Wow, so much we can talk about tonight. If you haven't done it yet, please tweet this out. Take the cut and paste and post this on your Twitter, post this on your Facebook, share it, make this a bigger conversation, bring people in. Remember, as I always say here, I love you all. I love all you lovers, you fans. Shout out to Jenny Lynn. I love all you haters. I love all you lurkers who don't say anything. Nikki Gallo is here spreading the revolutionary knowledge of Marxism, Leninism. Well, glad you're with us, Nikki Gallo. Gabriel Castro is with us. Welcome, Gabriel. Glad you are here. If you haven't done it yet, folks, please subscribe. Please click on the bell. Make sure you get notifications. And on top of that, please tweet this out and make this a bigger conversation. Share this on your Facebook. Bring other people in. Kinky is here asking me if I saw Trump's speech. I saw a good deal of Trump's speech, and I will be addressing it. JT24 is here. Golveramatz says, hi, Caleb. Well, hi, right back at you, Golveramatz. Wow, so many. The whole gang is here. This is great. This is great. So much we can talk about. I've got a list of things to talk about. I also want to talk about what you all want to talk about. I saw Kinky bringing up the desire for me to talk about Trump and the big parade today and all of that. I will, absolutely. David is here. Wow, so many people here ready to talk to us. I've got plenty of material to talk about. But hey, let's make this a bigger conversation. The more people you can bring on board, the more you can subscribe and hit the bell, the more fun we have here. Old Gringo says he tweeted and Facebooked it. Good work. Others should do the same. Hades says, let's do it. The Inundation says, I'm stoked. Glad you're stoked, Inundation. Super Desmond 12, Bob, people wanting me to talk about Deng Xiaoping and anarchism and socialism and the 4th of July. I will be talking quite a bit about the 4th of July. Wow, so much to get to. Please make this a bigger conversation. Wow, I'm going to take a drink of water, slow things down a little bit. All right, folks. So, as those of you who live in the United States cannot avoid knowing, today is the 4th of July. It is Independence Day in the United States, the day that in 1776 the Declaration of Independence was signed, right? That's the day the Founding Fathers declared that the United States was independent, that the 13 colonies would be independent from the British Empire. And I don't know if you can hear them in the background, but one thing that particularly annoys me about this time of year is the constant fireworks. And I'm not talking about the official fireworks shows. I'm talking about as I walk around, I just hear boom, 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 boom every so often. Even in New York City, we have fireworks going off. And I got to tell you, folks, it's annoying. I'm sitting here by my window. I just heard a gagoom, gagoom outside my window. It's not even dark yet. Somebody's shooting off fireworks. But I got to tell you, the other day, a few days ago, I was coming home from work. The sun was still up. I was in Manhattan near 34th Street. It was a time when there's a lot of people out, crowded place. And somebody, I don't know who, had the bright idea to shoot off some fireworks. And I tell you, it was crowded, New York City, rush hour, commuting time. I'm on 4th Street walking around, not underground. I heard that ba-boom, ba-boom, and we all panicked. People were ducking. Why? Because this is the age of mass shootings, for goodness sakes. Don't shoot off, in a crowded commuter area in New York City, do not shoot off fireworks in the middle of the day. People are going to get the fright of their life. Goodness gracious, I saw people jump under tables and duck when they heard the gaboom, gaboom from the fireworks. Don't shoot off fireworks in the middle of crowded civilian areas in this day and age. Good night. We were all afraid that this was the site of the latest, guy going crazy, and shooting people. It wasn't. It was just somebody shooting off fireworks. I didn't even see who the person was, but when it became clear no one was getting shot, it was just gaboom, gaboom. After that happened, we all went around with our lives, but don't do that, especially if you got like military veterans or people with PTSD. You don't want to be just randomly shooting off fireworks in public spaces. Not a good thing to do. Not a good thing to do. So, if you're hearing me now, if you're one of those people who likes to shoot off fireworks in public spaces, I urge you to not do that. Now, Nikki Gallo has sent me a super chat for the unnamed caffeinated beverage that will not be named. Well, I don't have it with me because it's already getting dark and I'd like to get to sleep at a decent time tonight. However, I will shout out to that beverage. I do enjoy drinking it. I am certainly addicted to that beverage. I will tell you that much. Trying to not drink too much more of it today. Had a couple cups already. I never developed a taste for coffee. I think that's the problem. That's why I like that particular soda beverage of choice so much. But yes, please, with the fireworks, do not shoot off fireworks randomly. I don't understand it. Like a couple of weeks before the 4th of July, I'm always hearing kaboom. A couple of weeks afterwards, I'm always hearing kaboom. What is this? People have fireworks in their backyard. People are walking down the street and they're like, oh, it's almost July 4th, or it was July 4th last year. I don't get it. I really, really don't get it. I do not understand it. One weird aspect. But let's get a little serious for a moment. So, the 4th of July, right? It's the outpouring of American patriotism. And for those of us who are, hip to the actual history of the United States, we get very frustrated with the July 4th narrative because it's very, very one-sided. It's a very, very one-sided narrative. Completely is. It doesn't talk about what was being done to the Native Americans and how when the United States was being settled by Europeans, Native Americans were being slaughtered in big numbers. I grew up in Ohio. There was one particular incident that happened during the American Revolution. It was called the Massacre at Hutton. It was just a horrendous incident where it was, the American colonists and the British, they were fighting, and there was this group of Native Americans who were pacifists. They had converted to a religion called Moravianism. They were pacifists, and they had offered medical care to people on both sides. And so the American colonists found out they'd been giving medical care to British soldiers, and so they went to the whole village and killed them all. Just a horrendous, horrendous incident. The massacre at Hutton in Ohio. And the settlers, the colonists beat their heads in with hammers. Just horrendous, horrendous stuff. And let's also you can't talk about the establishment of the United States as a country and the Declaration of Independence without talking about the transatlantic slave trade and the South, right? And, there were certainly a number of the founders of the United States in the North that were opposed to slavery, but the slavery was enshrined in the U.S. Constitution when it was eventually written. Slavery was a big part of the founding of the United States. Human chattel slavery, just a barbaric practice. I know often it's kind of almost routine for leftists to quote Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass very famously was invited to a July 4th picnic when he was an abolitionist activist in the lead up to the American Civil War. He was calling for slavery to be abolished, and he very famously gave a speech that's very often quoted. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I'm not going to quote it here. I don't have it memorized. Very powerful stuff, basically just condemning how dare these people be celebrating freedom as they practice slavery. Very, very powerful stuff. Um, and we who study American history, we know about the horrors of slavery, and we don't gloss over it. We don't pretend it wasn't a big deal, because it was. It was millions of people being killed on the way, millions of people being worked to death. We know about the slaughter of the Native Americans, and again, we don't try to gloss over it and say it wasn't a big deal. It was a ethnic genocide, mass killing, instances of murder, instances of people being given, intentionally poisoned with smallpox blankets, and in addition to that, there was a cultural genocide with the Indian schools, just horrendous stuff. We don't gloss over that. We don't pretend that's not a big deal. It was a very big deal, and the impact of it is certainly long-lasting. And so those of us who are woke to that, I guess, I'm saying woke, is that the hip terminology now? Those of us who are aware of all of that get a little bit frustrated, right? Trump was in D.C. today. He said, there's nothing America cannot do, and they play all that patriotic music, and you just get mad. You just get mad. And if you're somebody like me, who's been critical of the U.S. system of capitalism and imperialism for so long, if you're somebody like me who's heard that, in particular, you have memories of people just using patriotism as an excuse to be very, very stupid, right? You say, hey, this invasion of Iraq is not good. Maybe we shouldn't invade Iraq. And they say, why do you hate America? You got to just support our troops and shut up. If you don't like it here, why don't you move to another country? And you hear that stuff and it makes you mad. It's just, come on, that's not an argument, right? You can, what is this? You can't criticize the war, and if you do, well, you're unpatriotic. For the sake of loving your country, you have to support an illegal, immoral war. That's ridiculous, right? That's just an idiotic statement, right? A whole lot of that in the United States, especially capitalism, right? Capitalism is the American way, and if you don't like it, then you're un-American. America's great because of capitalism. Capitalism is American. If you don't like America, you don't like capitalism, move to some other place. You get mad when you hear that. It's annoying and it's stupid. It's not thinking. It's not coherent, right? It's just this kind of nonsensical rhetoric, right? That out of love for one's country, you must support all wars. Out of love for one's country, you must support the free market system that leaves millions of Americans in poverty and destitute. Out of loyalty to your homeland, you must not think. The first rule of American patriotism is thou shalt not think, right? It gets very frustrating. That interpretation, that stupid jingoist interpretation of American patriotism that we get all throughout society is very, 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 very frustrating, annoying, and infuriating to hear. And you get mad when you hear it. You really do. And if you're somebody who realizes what's wrong with capitalism and realizes what's wrong with the wars, you get tired of it. You really, really get tired of it. I remember, this is silly. I remember when I was a high school student, and I was getting a lot of this patriotism and stuff during the Iraq War. I decided as a joke that I would stop being patriotic and start being statriotic to Ohio. And I would, if anyone would criticize anything at my school, I'd say, well, then why don't you move to Michigan? Ohio is the greatest state in the whole United States. I was just trying to be funny and making light of how idiotic this would be. And people would say, oh, I don't like the roads here. Well, then maybe you ought to move to South Carolina, because that's how we do things here in Ohio. And if you don't care for it, why you move to another state? I'm a proud Ohioan. And just making fun of the silly jingoism. There's what is it, Gilbert and Sullivan. They in their opera, right, they had the joke where they're giving a tribute to a fellow, right, and they say, he is an Englishman. Yes, he is an Englishman. And despite the great temptation to be born in other nations, he is an Englishman. Yeah, and it's kind of mocking this, someone's great because of they're from the country that you are from, so therefore they're good, right? As if they made a choice about where they're being born. It's humorous, and you can laugh at jingoism, at national chauvinism. You can laugh at all this stuff, but you can also get angry. You can get very, very, very angry angry about it, because it's, again, it's nonsensical, and in a way, it's, when you think about all these ugly wars that have been waged in the name of the United States, where, right, we were invading Iraq to bring all these people freedom, right? People in Iraq, they were just so being oppressed, and Bush, out of the goodness of his heart, said, I'm going to give them American freedom. And, that stuff is really ugly, and you can laugh at it, but you can also get mad at the hypocrisy of it all. So I don't blame anybody. If you are somebody who when you hear this 4th of July stuff, it upsets you, it angers you, it makes you think about all the unjust wars, I'm with you, and I'm not opposed to you feeling that way. I certainly have felt that way a lot, and when I watch some of what's been going on in D.C. today, I certainly feel that way, right? But that said, I don't think that being patriotic means you have to agree with that stupidity. I think you can love America, you can love the country of the United States, you can love the people of the United States in your own way. I think you can love them by wanting to have a better system. I think you can love them by wanting to have peace with the world. I think you can love the United States by hoping that it breaks free from capitalism and moves toward a better society. I think that you can be patriotic in the sense of loving your country and loving the people in your country and be a socialist. That doesn't mean that you should go along with jingoism and flag waving. That doesn't mean you should whitewash any of the ugly things in American history, which there certainly are plenty of. But I don't think there's a need to burn the flag or to reject all patriotism. I think that you can argue, for example, that amid all of the bad, ugly stuff in American history, there's also been a progressive current. There have been people like you and me all throughout the history of this country. That has been covered up. That has been intentionally covered up, right? They've done everything they can to obscure the fact that there have been socialists all throughout American history. There have been people in the history of the United States who have protested wars. At the same time slavery was going on, there were constant slave revolts among the African Americans. There was constant abolitionist movements to abolish slavery. And even among the American revolutionaries, right? There were a lot of slaveholding, plantation owners who didn't want to be held back by the British and wanted to just go out and conquer. But Thomas Paine, I love Thomas Paine, right? He was the pamphleteer of the American Revolution. Thomas Paine, he wrote Common Sense, which was this mass, broadly circulated pamphlet urging independence from Britain. But Thomas Paine, you learn in school, you're memorizing your facts in your dull history class. History is the most flunked subject among American students. They hate it because it's taught in this very dull, vague, pseudo-patriotic way. But Thomas Paine, in addition to writing the Common Sense pamphlet, the pamphlet of the American Revolution, Thomas Paine was quite a progressive in a number of ways. Not only was he very outspoken and adamantly opposed to slavery, very, very opposed to slavery, but he actually called for a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans. He said that all Americans should be given a national dividend that they should receive from the government, a guaranteed income for all citizens, to make sure that they were all taken care of, right? What Andrew Yang is calling for now was first called for by Thomas Paine, right? And it's funny, you saw Glenn Beck and a lot of these right-wingers, they love to invoke Thomas Paine and Common Sense. Well, I bet they don't want everyone to have a universal guaranteed income. In addition, Thomas Paine was very, very critical of religion. He wrote a book called The Age of Reason, in which he pointed out the inaccuracies of mainstream religion in the United States. He criticized both the Catholic Church and a lot of the Protestant denominations. He was a very, very strong anti-clerical activist and calling for the separation of church and state. Thomas Paine actually supported the French Revolution. A lot of the founders of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, they distanced themselves. They thought the French Revolution was too radical. Thomas Paine not only supported the French Revolution, he went to France. He was there when it happened. Thomas Paine is a great figure, and he's, again, because he was so progressive, so opposed to slavery, so, advocating for a guaranteed income. You don't hear much about him, right? Another figure that's interesting, a lot of people don't realize, Alexander Hamilton, who was one of the presidents of the United States, and, he was one of the founders of the United States. Not only was he opposed to slavery, he supported the Haitian Revolution, right? Haiti was a colony of France, a slave colony. Well, Alexander Hamilton was opposed to slavery, and not only was he so opposed to slavery, he actually supported the Haitian Revolution and called for the USA to recognize the Haitian slave revolutionary government. Bet you didn't know that, right? Not all throughout U.S. history, you can find people that were progressive and socialistic and anti-war, anti-racist, anti-slavery. People like you and me, are a big part of the history of the United States of America. And they don't teach you that in school, and they obscure that. And so if you just hear everything, all the stuff you hear this very one-sided America, the great country that never did anything wrong and has just been spreading freedom and slavery is not a big deal, and if you hear all that stuff, right, you might think, okay, if I'm going to be a leftist, I have to burn the American flag. But the reality is, as long as the United States has been around, people like you and me have been part of it. We've been here. We have been part of this country from the beginning, right? There have been progressive-minded people. There are people like John Brown, who staged an armed revolt against slavery. There were people in the United States fighting for women's rights, fighting for the rights of factory workers and the labor movement. The struggle for the 8-hour workday actually predates the American Revolution. Before the American Revolution, before 1776, people were already demanding an 8-hour workday in the United States and protesting and organizing in their guilds and labor unions. There's a whole history of progressive struggles in the United States. You can go back to the labor movement and the Wobblies, the industrial workers of the world, and there is a whole history of people like you and me. We are part of U.S. history. We have a claim on the United States of America. We don't deserve to be written out of U.S. history, right? And when they put on these big patriotism shows that America's all about capitalism and war, and that's what it's all about, and if you don't like that, move somewhere else. No, we have been here. We've had a huge impact on the country, right? I've mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. In the Union Army during the Civil War, there was a brigadier general who was a communist. That's right. There was a communist brigadier general in the Union Army. Abraham Lincoln's army had a communist general in it. His name was August Willich, and he was a communist. He was a member of the Communist League. He had worked with Karl Marx. He had fled Germany after the 1848 revolution. He and Marx were constantly in touch with each other, writing back and forth. And there was a communist general in the Union Army. And Abraham Lincoln associated himself with communists, right? Roosevelt, the other most loved president in U.S. history, met with communists at the White House. Gilbert Greene, the leader of the Young Communist League, slept over at the White House when Roosevelt was there. I bet you didn't know that. When Congress was investigating Roosevelt for his ties to communists, Gilbert Greene, an American communist, got to sleep over at the White House. Roosevelt made a statement. Yep, I do associate with communists. In fact, you want to investigate my ties with communists? I'll have Gilbert Greene sleep over at the White House. You can look this up. Gilbert Greene, a Young Communist League member, slept over at the White House to make a statement. Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt let communists sleep over at the White House. Invited all kinds of labor leaders and socialists and organizers to the White House and talked with them about struggling against the right wing and for workers' rights. The two most loved presidents in U.S. history, Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, were the two friendly presidents to communists. Roosevelt was very friendly with communists. Lincoln was very friendly with communists to the point that he had a communist general in his army, right? Abraham Lincoln, you see Abraham Lincoln, think about August Willich, his communist general. And think about Harriet Tubman, the slave revolutionary he gave military rank as she went along the Combahee River in South Carolina, liberating slave plantations as a guerrilla fighter during the war. Think about Roosevelt. When you think about Roosevelt, think about how he met with communists at the White House and how he supported labor unions, right? We progressive-minded people who believe in socialism, want to get us out of the system of free market capitalism, are a big part of the history of the United States of America. And they can try to obscure us, and they can try to wipe us out, but we're here. We are part of this. We have always been here, and we always will be here. The word socialism in the English language, right? It was first used in French by Henri Saint-Simon. Socialisme with an E on the end, that's a French word. But the first person to use the word socialism in the English language was Robert Owen. Robert Owen. And Robert Owen lived in Indiana. That's right. The guy who first used the word socialism in the English language was a guy who lived most of his life, or a lot of his life, in Indiana. He was a British man, factory owner, but he didn't like capitalism. He didn't like the way workers were being treated. He formed kind of cooperative businesses and little communes, and he decided to move to New Harmony, Indiana. And he set up a colony in Indiana, a socialist colony in the state of Indiana. Robert Owen, the man who invented the word socialism, was from Indiana. Well, he wasn't from there. He was from Britain, but he lived a lot of his life in Indiana. And he was even invited to give a lecture on socialism to the U.S. Congress, right? Robert Owen, the man who invented the word socialism in the English language, was living in Indiana for a lot of his life, set up a socialist colony or commune in Indiana, and even addressed the U.S. Congress about his beliefs, right? The U.S. Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist. Bet you didn't know that, right? Francis Bellamy, right? He was a Baptist minister from Boston, and he gave sermons about the evils of capitalism and why, if you were a true Christian, you had to believe in socialism and you had to oppose racism. That was a big part of Francis Bellamy's belief systems, so much so that the Baptist Church of Boston banned him from the pulpit. They banned Francis Bellamy. They said he's too anti-racist. He's too socialist. He cannot give sermons in the city of Boston. He's banned. So what did Francis Bellamy do? He moved back to Florida, his home state, and he started preaching socialist sermons in Florida. But Florida, at that point, was a Jim Crow segregation state, and he didn't believe in Jim Crow segregation. So he refused to preach in churches where the blacks were on one side and the whites were on other. He said he was anti-racist. This is the man who wrote the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. You know, again, you're not going to hear that in patriotic, marches on the 4th of July. You're not going to learn that on the History Channel. But yes, socialists, they're a big part of U.S. history. And oddly, it was the cousin of the author of the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance, Francis Bellamy. It was his cousin who wrote a book called Looking Backward. And it's a science fiction novel. You should read Looking Backward. It's a science fiction novel. It was the most popular book. You go back to 1888 in the United States. This was like the Harry Potter of the time. It was like 50 Shades of Grey. It was a novel that everybody was reading. Everyone knew all about it, right? It was a fiction book that was like practically required reading among Americans. It was called Looking Backward. Looking Backward. And it was about a guy who's living in the United States, and he has trouble sleeping, so he gets a hypnotist to hypnotize him and put him to sleep. And he pulls a Rip Van Winkle. He sleeps for 100 years. He wakes up in the year 2000. And when he wakes up in the year 2000, the USA is socialist. It's a socialist America. And so he walks around and he learns all about the socialist America. And then he falls in love with the great-great-great-granddaughter of his fiancée. And so it's like he found his long-lost love or something like that. It's a love novel. It's romantic. And it's a socialist novel. And it was sold almost as many copies as Ben-Hur. It was very popular. In the aftermath of the U.S. Civil War, there was a lot of socialistic feeling in the United States. So we have always been here. We are as American as apple pie, right? And we acknowledge all the ugly, awful things in the history of this country. We would never try to downplay the horrors of slavery. We would never try to downplay the slaughter of the Americans, Native Americans. We would never try to downplay the horrors committed in the wars, whether you can talk about the Philippine-American War, where the Filipinos were fighting for their independence, and the United States massacred them over and over again. Hundreds of thousands of civilians slaughtered. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, so many, ugly, ugly wars in U.S. history. We don't support any of that, and we don't downplay any of that. But we say those of us who stood against these wars, those of us who stood for the rights of workers, those of us who stood against racism, we are part of the history of this country, and they cannot and should not be able to take that away from us. They shouldn't be able to say that socialists, communists, they're not part of American history. They're anti-American. They're un-American. They shouldn't be able to say that. We have a claim to this country. We have done a whole lot to fight for civil rights, to fight for equality, to fight for labor rights, to fight for education. We have been involved in so many progressive struggles, and we will not be written out of the history of this country. We will not allow Ben Shapiro We will not allow, Ben Shapiro, well, he's British, but we will not allow these right-wingers, Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson, to get up and say, I'm America, I'm what America's all about. No, you are not, good sir. You are part of what America is about. You are the ugly part of what America is about. You are the jingoistic, warmongering part of the United States that everyone around the world hates. But we, the socialists, we, the progressives, we are just as much a part of U.S. history. And you can't write us out of it. And no, you do not. You do not have America copyrighted. We, the progressives, who have stood against war and racism and oppression and struggled for the rights of working families, we are just as much at heart of the history of this country. And how dare you try to tell us that we're not? How dare you? You get up and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. We wrote that darn thing. We wrote it, right? You know? Unbelievable. You know, you try to say socialism's un-American. The guy who invented the word socialism in the English language, Robert Owen, lived in Indiana. So how can you say we're not part of it? Goodness gracious. You try to say we're unpatriotic, then tell me why Abraham Lincoln, one of the most well-loved presidents, who's on the $5 bill and the penny, had one of us as a general in his Union Army. You try to tell me we're not part of American history. You tell me why Franklin Roosevelt had one of us sleep over at the White House. The guy who led us during the Second World War thought we were so awesome he let us sleep over. Right? I mean, you know, he didn't just have us over for a meeting. He had Gilbert Green sleeping over at the White House. A sleepover guest. A stay-the-night guest at the White House. So don't let anyone try to tell you that we are un-American, that what we're about is we're opposed to what America's all about. No, we are not. No, we are not. They have obscured our role, but we have always been here, and we always will be here. And at this moment, while billionaire monopolists wreck the country, as greed is taking its toll, as that's taking place, we are the only ones that point to a way out. It's only through turning to our ideas that things are going to get any better, right? You're not going to find a way out with capitalism, I'll tell you that much. Well, there you go. Wow, that was my rant. So, I'm sure that all of you were tuning in and watching every minute of the $92 million parade we just watched in Washington, D.C., right? You all just couldn't miss it, right? With the planes flying over and Trump giving a speech and the military band. $92 million. Goodness gracious, for a silly parade. Well, you know, we can't give water to people being held in the migrant facilities while, you know, our bridges are crumbling, while our water is not being properly purified, right? While, I mean, you know, we have municipalities all over the country that are all over this country. We've got municipalities that are unpaving the roads, but can't spend money on that. No. Got to have a big parade. Got to have a huge, big parade in Washington, D.C. Shoot off a bunch of fireworks. Show off the guns. Oh, my goodness. Right? You know, I mean, this is unfortunate. And it's unfortunate from a number of different angles. Because, right, we know that Trump did not win because he had support in New York City. He might be from there, but people here didn't vote for him, right? We know Trump didn't win because he had support in Los Angeles or in San Francisco. That Trump, you know, his support comes from small towns. You know, small towns, rural towns, suburban towns. You know, the South, the Midwest, where I'm from, that's where people were voting for him. And the reason that Trump did this song and dance extravaganza, this big, huge marching up and down the streets parade in Washington, D.C., the reason he did it is because those small towns where people vote for him, well, those are also where the people who fight in the wars come from. I mean, people from my graduating class went into the military and fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? You know, it's not you know, the wealthy people from Long Island who go into the military. It's not, you know, the rich kids of you know, Beverly Hills who go and fight in these wars. And it's these small towns, it's Appalachia, it's the South, Alabama, Mississippi, these low-income folks from small towns that are suffering from deindustrialization. Maybe 20 years ago they wouldn't have gone into the military. They could have gotten a job in the mill or a job in the factory, but the factory closed down, and so they're going off into the military, hoping they can learn a trade, hoping they can get their college paid for, you know, and they feel left behind. And so Trump, that's why he put on this parade, right? He put on this parade because he wanted those folks to feel like someone cared about them, right? And unfortunately, caring about them is mixed in with all this ugly stuff. It almost reminds you, Rudyard Kipling, who was the British writer. I don't know if folks know Rudyard Kipling. He was a British imperialist, poet, novelist. He wrote all kinds of things. He wrote the racist poem, Take Up the White Man's Burden, about basically encouraging the USA to colonize the Philippines. But Rudyard Kipling, he wrote a short story for children, which I have quoted before. It's called The Elephant's Child. And basically, this short story that Rudyard Kipling wrote, The Elephant's Child, it's basically an analogy for settler colonialism, and it points toward almost the tragedy that we saw in this parade. So the elephant's child, right? It tells the story. You have this baby elephant, and this baby elephant is always asking questions and annoying his parents and relatives, right? He has insatiable curiosity, and it's very annoying. And the response of the relatives to this baby elephant that is constantly asking annoying questions is to spank him, right? So they're spanking this baby elephant for asking too many questions. So one day, the baby elephant is asking its relatives, what does the alligator eat for dinner, right? And this is Rudyard Kipling. What does the alligator eat for dinner? They don't give him an answer. They just spank him when he asks the question. So the little baby elephant goes down to the river to talk to the alligator, to find out what the alligator eats for dinner. The alligator then grabs hold of his trunk, and they have his nose, I guess, and they have this little tug of war. And then the elephant, that's how the elephant got its trunk. It gets this big long nose. And this big long nose that the elephant has is very helpful. Why? Because now, when the elephant is asking too many questions and the relatives, the aunt, the uncle, the whatever, go to spank him, why, he's got the big long nose and he can spank him back. Right? That's Rudyard Kipling's sick little demented fairy tale. Not exactly promoting healthy family relations, but it's even sicker if you can understand what it means, right? And, what is this about? This baby elephant, the elephant has no trunk and goes down to the river and it gets the trunk pulled on and it's, now it's spanking its relatives back. What's going on? Well, it's an analogy for the working class of Britain, right? It's an analogy for the working class of Britain. The working class people of Britain who were being worked to death in mills and factories, working their fingers to the bone. Rudyard Kipling believed that the way that the working class of Britain, whether they be English or Welsh or Scottish, the way that they could redeem themselves was by becoming colonizers and settlers, by going down to the third world, by going to India, by going to Africa, by going to the Caribbean, by going to the Southeast Asia, that they could redeem themselves, all right? Just like the elephant goes down to the river and gets tough by getting its big long trunk, right? That was the belief of Rudyard Kipling. You can see this in one of his poems about red coats. He makes the same analogy of how, the soldiers in Britain were often mistreated because being a red coat, being a soldier in the British Army was seen as a vulgar working class thing to do. And he has a poem about, a red coat, a soldier goes into a fancy restaurant and they kick him out because it's a vulgar working class thing to do to be a soldier. And it's this whole belief that working class people, white working class people in the first world can get some respect in the world by going to the third world and beating the crap out of black and brown people. I kid you not. It's tragic. It's really, really tragic. And when you watch this parade, right, that's basically it. I mean, these are the people of the United States from the South, from Appalachia, low-income, white working class people who get kicked around, get ripped off, have seen their living standard go down, and Trump is saying to them, uniform, join the U.S. military, go and bomb Iraq, go and fight in Afghanistan, go and help me provoke Iran, go and do that, and you can get some respect, right? Then you can be an oppressor too, right? We'll respect you, we'll treat you better. Go and try to redeem your image, right? By being an oppressor yourself, right? That's the tragedy. The tragedy of imperialism, right? Is that you see working class people trying to redeem themselves. People make analogies to the Buffalo Soldiers, right? Of, African Americans who'd been freed from slavery. and then in the hopes of getting some respect from the USA, going out to fight and kill Native Americans, right? It's just a tragedy, right? The Buffalo Soldiers, right? All these recently freed African slaves joining up and going out to fight Native Americans. And that's really the tragedy we see here, this belief that you can redeem yourself. You can win some respect in the eyes of your oppressor, rather than having solidarity with those Native Americans. You know, the Buffalo Soldiers went out and said, "I'm going to go kill some Native Americans to prove that I'm an American and try to get some respect, even though I'm black, even though I'm a former slave." Right? These folks from Appalachia. That's the tragedy of settler colonialism. Lenin, in his book Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, he has a very fascinating quote from Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was the founder of Rhodesia, which is what Zimbabwe was called before it won its independence. Rhodesia. Cecil Rhodes, the colonizer of Africa. And he said very famously that if you want to avoid a civil war, you must become an imperialist. He went to a wild meeting of the unemployed, and they were rioting and protesting, demanding bread, bread, bread. And imperialism is the way to avoid the class war in Britain. And Lenin quotes him. He quotes an article written by Cecil Rhodes basically saying this. The way to stop workers' revolution in the British homeland was to take all those poor British people and put them in uniforms and send them to Africa. Send them to Africa to be overseers, to be settlers, to gun down African people, right? This is the old trick of imperialism, right? And it's really a big tragedy. And the sad thing is, so many of these people in Appalachia, in different parts of the country, you know, the left has largely ignored them, right? As they're dying from opioids, you know, the socialist and communist groups, they don't, you know, they think they're all in the KKK, they're all a bunch of Klansmen, they're all worthless, they're all white trash. They're not hip, you know, talking against racism is cool, it's trendy, talking, you know, about immigrant rights is cool and trendy, but talking about low-income white workers, who cares about them? They're a bunch of racist Trump people. That's the attitude. You know, when that teachers' strike happened in West Virginia, and you had all these teachers in West Virginia who were sick and tired of how they were being treated, heroically going on strike and saying that they wanted better conditions. They weren't going to be ripped off in the healthcare thing. They weren't going to have to wear a wristwatch to monitor their health. That they were not going to be treated that way and degraded and humiliated. And their pay was too low. The teachers of West Virginia went on strike. I saw with my own eyes people who call themselves socialists and communists saying, "Screw them." You know, and saying, "Oh, these are a bunch of racist, white, Trump-supporting teachers in Appalachia. They should pay reparations. You know, one settler, one bullet. Screw that." I mean, this is the attitude, right? This attitude where if you don't care about working-class people in the United States that are suffering, how do you expect to build solidarity? It's really, really unfortunate that attitude among leftists, right? Whereas, you know, then the only person talking to these people is going to be those that try to point them and use them to attack people of a different nationality, to use them to push for a bigger police state and bigger attacks on immigrants. You know, it's a mess. We need solidarity, right? Class solidarity. That was something that the Communist Party USA in its heyday was famous for. Right? Class solidarity. In the city of San Francisco, the dock workers were, you know, they were all white basically, and they were all very badly treated. And whenever they would go on strike, the way that the bosses would break the strike is they would bring in African Americans, right? They had a racist union. The longshore workers did, the dock workers. And so when there was a strike, the bosses would bring in African Americans to break the strike. But that changed in 1934 when the Communist Party USA got involved. The Communist Party USA was really widely respected in the black community because they opposed racism. They opposed Jim Crow segregation. They were supporting African national liberation struggles. And so the Communist Party USA got the dock workers to put one of their demands being that African Americans be hired to work on the docks. African Americans be allowed to become longshoremen. Right? And the Communist Party, instead of playing into that whole divide, instead of saying that they were for the white dock workers and their racist union, instead of, you know, a situation where the black workers would be used to break the strike by the racist white union, the Communist Party, when they came in there with the ILWU, the International Longshore Warehouse Union, it was a solidarity strike. And the black community, understanding that the union was their ally, and understanding that if the strike was won, that then there would be black workers for the first time working on the docks, right? When that happened, when that deal was made, the black community supported the ILWU and the strike. The white workers supported it. San Francisco was shut down. It was one of the biggest strikes in the country had ever seen, the San Francisco General Strike of 1934. And it created one of the most radical unions that exists in the United States. The ILWU, International Longshore Warehouse Union, is a radical union that is opposed to the war in Iraq, that has shut down the docks, to protest on behalf of, opposing apartheid in South Africa. ILWU, very radical union, was created by solidarity, right? Of no more racism in the union, no more, whipsawing, right? Class solidarity, right? We have to get past this idea that the only way for a section of the working class in the United States to gain is at the expense of another section of the working class. That's a myth. All the workers in the United States are suffering because of the capitalists, right? Obviously, those workers who suffer racism and discrimination, come from historically, marginalized and oppressed communities, are suffering more. But there is no this belief that the only way the white working class of Appalachia and the rural and suburban areas can gain is at the expense of the black community. The only way the black community can gain is at the expense of the white community. That's a myth, and that's a whipsawing of the working class in the United States that the bosses have engineered, right? Trump says he wants to make America great again. He's the champion of the low-income whites, he claims, right? The Democrats, they are the champions of the black working class and the Latino community, and against the white working class. They claim, no, class solidarity. Don't be whipsawed. Don't let the working class be whipsawed. We need class solidarity, right? And that is what is missing from the discourse and the privilege rhetoric that comes out of the universities these days doesn't point toward solidarity. It points toward this idea that white workers are the enemy, and that's problematic. It really is. Racism is a big problem, and racism needs to be opposed, and no one should ever downplay the problem of racism, and the concerns of the oppressed should be given primary support. But this notion that we want the white working class of the United States to suffer, is wrong, right? We want class solidarity. That's what made the Communist Party of the United States so effective and powerful. That's why they were able to build the United Auto Workers Union, for goodness sakes, the best paying industrial jobs in the country. The Steel Workers Union, built by Gus Hall and William Z. Foster, right? I mean, the way that industrial workers in the United States and those jobs that have, disappeared, those good paying industrial jobs, got what they got was by solidarity. It was class struggle, solidarity, that's what built it, right? That was the line of the Communist Party. They were rejecting the racism of the labor movement. Labor unions, up until then, AFL labor unions, tended to have whites-only rules. The Communist Party was opposed to that 100%. No racism in the union. They were absolutely opposed to it, and they went to the white working class, and they said the only way you can advance is by advancing the African-American community as well. When the Flint sit-down strike took place, the very famous Flint sit-down strike of 1937, when they marched out of the plant victoriously, the striking sit-down strikers, they picked there was one black worker in the plant, and they let him be the one to carry the American flag when they marched out, right? And the CIO, the Communist Party, the industrial organization that brought steel workers and auto workers and others into organized labor, the CIO had a policy of not supporting hate strikes. It was very common. There'd be what they called hate strikes, right? That there'd be a factory, they'd hire a black person, all the white workers would go on strike. Well, the CIO said, if you do that, you're done. We're not protecting you, just fire you. No, we're not going to protect a hate strike. No hate strikes, right? That was the CIO and the Communist Party policy. We will not support a hate strike. No hate strikes. And hate strikes were a big problem in the 1930s, but the Communist Party, because of their influence on the labor movement, they said, we will not tolerate hate strikes. Fascinating stuff, right? Class solidarity, what is missing from so much of the discourse. Wow, so much to talk about. Now, this parade that happened today, I recognize what Trump is doing. He's trying to say to all the people, in small towns, all the people with relatives in the military. You're being heard. He's trying to do a gesture of support, but it's still offensive. This parade's offensive. A display of American military power. If you think about the millions who got killed in Iraq, the millions who got killed in Libya, I'm going to get to Libya in a minute, the millions who were killed in Vietnam and Korea, the millions who have died in Afghanistan, how Afghanistan has been occupied and turned into a giant heroin factory, a heroin plantation. It's offensive, right? To celebrate American military power when the United States goes around the world destroying countries, right? As much as you want to, sympathize with people in the military and sympathize with the fact that, they're sent to die in the boss's wars, you don't want to glorify American military power. And that this parade was very much, it was a middle finger to all the people around the world who have suffered in these horrendous wars waged by the United States. It was a middle finger to them, right? It was a middle finger to the millions of Iraqis. It was a middle finger to the people of Afghanistan. It was a middle finger to all the people who live in terror of drone strikes around the world. That's a really common thing now. People in different countries, Pakistan, elsewhere, are terrified of these drone strikes. This parade was a middle finger. So, as much as I don't agree, and you all know that I don't think socialists should be burning the American flag, I don't think that's the right approach. As much as I don't agree that that's the way to promote socialism, I think it was okay. It was fine that the Revolutionary Communist Party went out and did their thing and burned the American flag, right? That parade was a middle finger to a lot of people around the world, so the RCP, the Bobavakian people went and gave the middle finger to the back. They gave the middle finger back. Well, good for them, right? I don't agree with burning the American flag. I don't think that's the right approach to socialism, but hey, if you give a middle finger to the people of the world, the RCP wants to give the middle finger back. Let them do it, And hey, it is protected speech. It is. The Supreme Court says, look, it's your right. It's a political statement. You have the right to burn the flag. It's a political statement. It's an offensive statement. Not a political statement I encourage people to make, but hey, they have the right to do it, and they went there and they did it. And I watched that clip, and it was, thank goodness I wasn't in D.C., for goodness sakes. My goodness, thank goodness I was able to enjoy a nice holiday here at my Brooklyn apartment. But the RCP, they went out there, they burned their flags, and the Proud Boys, roughed it up with them. I've seen the video. It was crazy, but, the RCP, they did their thing, and, hey, if you're going to have a big celebration of military power of the United States at a time where that has resulted in millions of deaths, needless deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan and destroying countries and drone strikes and all of that, if you're going to throw a big parade to celebrate, American militarism when it's being used for such evil purposes, if you're going to do that, expect people to give the middle finger back. That's what the RCP was doing, right? I think that burning the American flag, again, not the right approach. I think that I have a right to be a part of this history of this country, and I don't like being written out of it, but, they gave the middle finger back. They did their thing. It was the RCP. And hey, they have the right to do it. Not what I would do, but it was interesting to watch the clip, and they go out there and, they do it. And the RCP has been doing that for years, right? Joey Johnson, or Gregory Johnson, the RCP guy he burned a flag at the Republican convention in the 1980s, and he's the one who took it all this way to the Supreme Court. They tried to give him 2 years in prison for doing it. The RCP's been doing that for years. It's kind of their trademark, right? And it's their thing, and it is what it is, right? And the people who are against flag burning, who want it to be illegal, it's like, why should it be illegal? It's a political statement. Yeah, but it's a political statement I don't like. It's like, that's not how free speech works, is it? I thought it was free for people you disagree with, right? I thought you were allowed to be offensive. And also, all these people on the alt-right, that's what I don't get too, right? They're all about, Facebook is silencing me. What about free speech? Twitter is silencing me. And then they want to go beat up somebody from burning an American flag. Well, if you're allowed to say racially offensive things on Twitter, shouldn't you be allowed to burn an American flag and offend people that way too? Why is racially offensive speech okay, but if someone offending your patriotism is not okay, right? If all of these, alt-right people are all about free speech and against deplatforming, shouldn't the RCP have a platform to burn the flag? Shouldn't they? Right? It's free speech until it's someone you don't like, as they say. so much to say about that. But yeah, I encourage people to read Lenin's letter to the American workers. I think it's a great document, and it shows the correct approach. Lenin praises the revolutionary aspects of American history, the struggle to abolish slavery, the war against the British Empire, and I think that's interesting. And I encourage people to read that. I really do think people should read it. You know, all this stuff about the immigration crisis. And I see posts from people saying all these people are fleeing from socialist countries. No, they are not. Guatemala is a free market country. In fact, Guatemala is so free market at this point they don't have a post office, right? They privatized the post office and then they ran out of money to pay for it. So I mean, Guatemala is a Wall Street playground. Honduras is a Wall Street playground. In 2009, they had a socialist president, Manuel Zelaya. He was toppled in a coup. And right now, every time the people of Honduras have been struggling, the United States backs them being suppressed. The elections there have been, a lot of the population there has felt that the elections are rigged. There's been a lot of protesting. And Honduras basically has a government imposed on it by the United States. It has free market capitalism. Now, Mexico is in an interesting spot, right? Because Mexico, at this point, they finally, after years of what many people observed and argued was election fraud and all of that, the socialist AMLO, Lopez Obrador, has been elected, right? And he may be changing the direction in the country. But there was just a strike against AMLO by the police. I don't know if people saw that. Lopez Obrador, the president of Mexico, is trying to completely revamp the way the Mexican federal police work because they're corrupt. I mean, they're tied in with the narco gangs and they're getting, huge caches of U.S.-made weapons that conveniently always end up in the hands of the narco gangs and huge problems in Mexico. So AMLO is trying to restructure the police and put them under the dominion of the National Guard, of the military, right? Because there's so much corruption. And so we just saw a group of federal police who don't like AMLO seizing control of headquarters. It was like an armed revolt by these federal police against AMLO, against Lopez Obrador, the left-wing president who finally got elected in Mexico. Very interesting. And he actually said, interestingly, he said there was a dark hand behind the revolts. He didn't say who, but he said there was a dark hand behind this police against him. I wonder who that dark hand is. Is he suggesting this is the CIA trying to remove him? Is he perhaps suggesting that this is some kind of conspiracy? Is he saying it's the drug gangs themselves? But AMLO said that it was there was a dark hand behind this police uprising against him. And I guess, the police force of Mexico that is so corrupt and so tied in with the narcos and the drug gangs, it's very difficult. Now, people are tweeting they see difficulty, they see a threat to AMLO's safety. I'm sure he's very much in danger, because, he's wanting to restructure things. Moving against the federal police of Mexico that have been so corrupt for so long, that's a tough thing to do. But anyway, what else is on people's minds, folks? I've been going for a little while here, but I know you all have issues you want to discuss. Now, Kinky said that there are al-Qaeda terrorists in Mexico. I really doubt that. Well, she was saying she heard people say that. And Kinky says, where's Bolton? Good question, yeah. And what's going on with North Korea and Bolton? There's a lot of questions there. Rumors going around that Bolton could be fired. That Trump and Bolton don't get along, right? That's very interesting stuff. And where is Bolton? What's going on with that? Bolton, Mr. Neoconservative Bolton, where is he? What's going on there? What else is happening, folks? What else is on people's minds? What a day it is. It's dark outside my window. I saw some fireworks a minute ago. It looked like somebody somewhere shooting off those fireworks. Not the official fireworks show, just somebody shooting them off. But they do that right this time of year. There you go. What else is happening now? Someone says I'm buffering, that they have low internet. Well, I'm just doing my thing here like I always do, but people complain about that a lot, about me buffering or things not quite working out. Maybe I should get a better internet service. What's the best way to fight dogmatism in the left-wing movement, says Nathaniel Adams. Well, I don't think it's a matter of fighting dogmatism. I'm not an activist. I don't have a horse in that fight, so to speak. I can tell you what I think. And I have my new book, and in a minute I'm going to read to you all from my new book, because there's a section that I think would be of particular interest to some of you. Yeah, Kinky says, "Oh boy." Well, there you go. Yeah, a lot going on in the world today. I saw there was a stabbing, at a plasma center in Virginia, today. It's so tragic. These plasma centers, this is where people go to get like $50 to like sell their blood plasma. Low income people that are desperate for money, and now there was a stabbing at one. That's kind of heartbreaking. But I also wanted to talk about Libya. I want to talk about Libya because folks saw there was an attack on a migrant center in Libya, right? There was like an airstrike on a migrant center, and it's not clear who did it, right? And different factions in Libya are claiming responsibility for it. But folks, why can no one admit that what has happened in Libya is a disaster? Libya had a socialist government. Muammar Gaddafi, it was Islamic socialism, highest life expectancy on the African continent, free education for everybody. I mean, Gaddafi built like the most efficient irrigation system in the world, the great man-made river. He started bringing water to this African country. Compare Libya prior to 2011 to Libya today. That should be proof that no matter what you want to say about Gaddafi, that should be proof in itself that these wars do not liberate people. Look at Libya today, for goodness sakes. The country's drowning in civil war. Different factions fighting against each other. People trying to flee the country. Things are so bad in Libya, a country that used to have the highest life expectancy in Africa. People are drowning and dying in the Mediterranean. People are packed into these immigration migrant centers that now one of them got attacked. Libya look at Libya, right? If you think U.S. military regime change works, if you think, overthrowing, unjust regimes and spreading human rights around the world, you think that makes life better. If you think U.S. military interventionism is spreading freedom, take a look at Libya. When Gaddafi was in Libya, Al-Qaeda was not. ISIS was not, right? When Gaddafi, they have taken a country, an African country, right? A Muslim African country, North Africa, Libya, highest life expectancy, using its oil proceeds to industrialize. They built the world's biggest irrigation system. It was like they were really doing a lot to just take care of people and raise the life expectancy of people. And the conditions there, they had wiped out illiteracy. They were caring for people. They actually had a policy that any African who came to Libya, they would give you a job. So it wasn't even just their own people they were taking care of, for goodness sakes. Libya, since the U.S. NATO overthrow of the Libyan socialist government, has been a disaster. Right? If you compare socialist Libya to free market, bombed into joining the Western capitalist system Libya, there's no way you can say that this system helps people. Libya is now part of the global free market capitalist system, and it's a wreck. Right? Now, Kinky is saying that Bolton told Tucker he thought Libya was a great success. Right? Yeah, of course. It was a great success, right? An anti-imperialist leader was killed. A socialist government was overthrown. An oil exporting country was blown to bits, and now everyone who was buying their oil from Libya now has to buy it from Wall Street in London, right? It was great for Western capitalism and imperialism, but for the actual Libyan people, it was a disaster. For the human race, it was a disaster. It caused instability. People were fleeing. People are fleeing and dying. Now there's refugees. It's a mess. The Libyan situation, look at that. The next time the U.S. government is on TV talking about this evil dictator is killing people, so we have to intervene, think about Libya, right? That's what they do. This is the result of their wars. I cannot think of a single place where they have invaded and bombed and destroyed and made life better for the people in the long run. This liberation that they always talk about with their wars, this liberation that was being celebrated on display with Trump with the big parade today, it doesn't happen. Iraq, the people of Iraq are not liberated. The people of Afghanistan are not liberated and better off. People of Libya are not liberated and better off. The USA has been funding extremists and terrorists trying to overthrow the Syrian government. They're not any better off. This stuff is not working. It's not good. This regime change stuff does not make a better life for the people. It doesn't. It just doesn't. That's a fact. Joe Howard is Gaddafi predicted the migrant crisis and Brexit. That doesn't surprise me. I'd like to see documentation of that, but it's very possible. Um, I mean, it's a disaster, right? And this is what happens when a socialist independent government is destroyed by Western capitalism. It destroys the living conditions. The people are, drowned into poverty. Look at Eastern Europe after the overthrow of socialism. Did the life expectancy and living conditions of the people of Eastern Europe get better? No. Look at Serbia, for goodness sakes, right? We were bombing Serbia. We had the CIA and the West were funding Otpor to bring down the dictator. Is Serbia better off now that Milosevic is out of there? Show me a single place where this regime change stuff has made life better. I cannot think of one. It's not about making life better. It's about destruction. It's about keeping the world poor and desperate so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. It's about clearing the market with chaos. And that's what people have to understand. Imperialism is not about bringing development. There's some people that will try to tell you that, well, the USA failed in Iraq. That's a very common line among leftists even. Well, the USA failed in Iraq. Look, they haven't created stability. They failed. No, the USA got exactly what it wanted in Iraq. The Ba'ath Arab Socialist government, overthrown. Country cast into civil war, killing, death, destruction, chaos. They got exactly what they wanted. Did they fail in Afghanistan? Nope. Overthrew the Taliban, utter chaos, civil war, drug gangs, terrorism, instability, mind you, right on the border. Afghanistan's very strategic. It is on the border with Russia. It is on the border with China, and it's on the border with Iran. So that's three countries the United States doesn't like now have a big problem of terrorists and drug gangs spilling into their country, right? All that heroin in Afghanistan, that's going into Russia. Russia is having to deal with drug gangs and opioids, right? It's going into China. China's having to deal with terrorists and Islamo-separatists and drug gangs on their border. Iran is having to deal with Sunnis and heroin and drug gangs, right? The USA toppled the Taliban, let that country just reduce itself to chaos and instability, and antagonize their three major geopolitical rivals. Russia, China, and Iran now all have an Afghanistan problem, right? Instability in Afghanistan has been very, very good for Western capitalism. This is it's about antagonizing geopolitical rivals. It's about destroying anyone who might get in their way. It's a mess, right? And China has been trying to go into Afghanistan and build some trains and build some, and develop the place. And the United States has been doing everything it can to keep China and the One Belt, One Road initiative out of Afghanistan because they don't want it to be stable, right? If Afghanistan can be stable, then Russia and China and Iran will have less to worry about, right? Think about it, right? China has programs where they're taking Afghans over the Chinese border to go to the hospitals. They're trying to build railroads in there. They're trying to build infrastructure in Afghanistan, stabilize the place, and put the drug dealers and the terrorists out of business. Joe Howard cites Brzezinski's Grand Chessboard book, right? This is the sinister view of imperialism. But, folks, I wanted to change gears here because, I have this new book, right? City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Lulu. It's available. You can buy it. There's links available. It's out there. You can very easily get yourself a copy of it. If you haven't gotten a copy, get one. Get one now. Link below. I'll put the link in later. You can get yourself a copy of it. City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. It's my new book. And I wasn't sure what I was going to read. I was thinking I would read the part about American rebirth and socialism in the United States, but I think we've kind of beat that dead horse about American patriotism and all of that a little bit too much. So I actually had the idea. A few months back, I kept getting a message from somebody, one of you fans out there, was really wanting me to just make the case, give the facts that socialism did not fail, all in one place, right? And that is my biggest pet peeve, I will say. One of my biggest pet peeves is this whole socialism doesn't work thing. Socialism just makes everyone poor. Socialism never worked anywhere. Oh my God, it's failed everywhere. It's just not true. Just factually not true. So when I was writing my new book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, I made a big point, I decided, of refuting that. So I wrote a section of the book designed to refute that point. And I did a lot of research and all of that. And somebody, I don't know who, somebody had the idea that it might be good to have me refuting that socialism doesn't work stuff. And it is a myth. A lot of people believe it. A lot of people have bought into this socialism has failed everywhere it's ever been tried stuff. And it's not true. Socialism has not failed. Socialism has been overwhelmingly successful. So this is the section from my new book, and it's about the history of socialism. It's called Socialist Construction and the Rise of Eurasia, from City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. Socialist Construction and the Rise of Eurasia. Prior to his death, Lenin explained the goals of the Soviet government this way, quote, "There can be no question of rehabilitating the national economy or of communism unless Russia is put on a different and higher technical basis than that which it has existed up to now. Communism is Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country, since industry cannot be developed without electrification. This is a long task, which will take up to 10 years to accomplish, provided a great number of technical experts are drawn into the work." The vision was put into practice in 1928, after the defeat of the Trotskyite and Bukharinite opposition and the triumph of Stalin's vision of socialism in one country. Stalin's 5-year economic plans completely transformed the Soviet Union into an economic superpower. By 1936, the USSR was the world's top steel manufacturer. And had constructed the world's largest hydroelectric power plant. The Soviet Union had brought running water and electricity to every household and wiped out illiteracy among the population. New universities had been constructed across the country, and modern apartment buildings had replaced rural villages with huts. Interviewed for a 1998 PBS documentary called Red Flag, part of the People's Century documentary series, Tatiana Fedorova, an elderly female construction worker, described her memories of the 5-year plans. Quote, "We wanted to do something with our own hands, to glorify our country, not just with words, but with deeds, and we did it. We built the metro, we built the railways. We did it all with such comradeship, enthusiasm, and happiness. And if today I could live again, despite all the difficulties, I would have done the same thing. Stalin set a task, build this or build that, and thanks to the fact that people trusted him and this enthusiasm of young people, it was possible. Remember that we were illiterate, lived in virtual darkness, and wore birch bark shoes. Even now, I think it's like something out of a fairy tale. It was one of the most difficult times to build this country. To build these great construction sites would only be possible through the unity of the people and the love of their people for their idol. The secret behind this massive success in economic construction was socialist central planning. The Soviet state had the ability to do what the chaos of the market could not do, unleash growth. The Soviet Union had eliminated the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, and thus enabled a backward, undeveloped country to rise to the level of a global superpower. The Stalin era was marked by mobilizations of the population to achieve collective goals toward the overall rebirth of the country. Maurice Dobb, an economics lecturer at the University of Cambridge, summarizes with actual numbers the economic progress that was made by socialist central planning in the USSR between 1928 and 1938 in his text Soviet Economic Development Since 1917. In this single decade, the Soviet Union multiplied its rate of electrification tenfold. During this period, coal production increased by 3.5 times, and 20 new tramway systems were built, along with 80 new bus systems. The number of hospital beds in rural areas doubled. By 1938, the Soviet Union had a larger tractor production apparatus than any other country in the world, and also led the world in locomotive production. American radio personality Fraser Hunt, writing for the New York American in 1931, emphasized how dramatic the Soviet Union's explosion of economic growth really was. He said, this is Fraser Hunt, quote, "Japan, westernizing and industrializing itself 50 years ago, was doing child's play compared to what the Soviet Union is doing today. Already, almost overnight, the USSR has become an industrial country. One of the greatest achievements of the Soviet Union's rapid industrialization was the creation of the Dnieper Dam located in Ukraine. When this hydroelectric facility was completed in 1932, it was the largest such facility in the entire world. The Soviet Union hired technicians from General Electric, an American corporation, to oversee the project, and then mobilized thousands of people to build this massive power plant that brought electricity to the Soviet countryside. In 1941, as Nazi invaders poured into Ukraine, the local residents dynamited the dam so that the Nazis could not seize it and use it for their war efforts. The Dnieper Dam was then reconstructed after the war. It must also be noted that the economic renaissance created by socialism in Russia and the surrounding republics that made up the Soviet Union took place while the rest of the world was having a Great Depression. Writing for The Nation, Louis Fisher observed, quote, this is Louis Fisher writing for The Nation, "The Soviet frontier is like a charmed circle which the world economic crisis cannot cross. While the banks crash, while production falls, and while the trade languishes abroad, the Soviet Union continues in an orgy of construction and national development. The scale and speed of its progress is unprecedented." The Soviet Union was a center of scientific and technological innovation. Soviet scientists invented space travel and LED lights. The Soviet Union created the AK-47 rifle, the most efficient weapon ever invented. The first mobile phone ever created was patented in 1957 by Soviet engineer Leonid Ivanovich Kaprianovich. And while Western countries freely adopted Soviet technology, the Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Controls functioned as an agreement between 16 NATO countries, banning the sale of high technology to the USSR. The New York Times described this treaty as, quote, organized to ensure that strategic technology such as computers, machine tools, and microelectronic items that could be used for weapons and other military applications did not fall into the hands of the USSR. And though the Soviet Union was prevented from collaborating with Western computer companies and had nowhere near the level of resources to invest in such endeavors, the Soviet Union actually went as far as manufacturing its own home computer system. In 1985, the Electronica BK0010. In the contemporary United States, statements to the effect of "the Soviet Union completely failed" or "socialism has never worked anywhere" are quite common. These statements simply spit in the face of well-documented evidence and do not acknowledge the economic miracles that took place during the golden years of the Soviet Union. From 1917 to 1960, the life expectancy of the Soviet people nearly doubled. Medical care was made widely available even in the most remote parts of the country. The overall living conditions for the population within the Soviet Union improved tremendously due to socialist central planning. Despite the shortcomings of the Soviet Union in terms of human rights and consumer goods, no society had ever raised its technological level and living conditions so rapidly. As the Soviet Union was rapidly industrializing, the world's press marveled at what it had accomplished. Among the voices praising the Soviet Union were Albert Einstein, H.G. Wells, the young Nelson Mandela, and British intellectuals Sidney and Beatrice Webb. In his autobiography, published in 1969, the well-loved African-American scholar W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, quote, "What I saw in the Soviet Union was more than a triumph in physics. It was the growth of a nation's soul, the confidence of a great people in its plan and future. We have begun to recognize the Soviet Socialist Republic as giving its people the best education of any in the world and excelling in science and organizing industry at the highest level." After repudiating the Trotskyite opposition, the Soviet Union very much became a society marching in line with the legacy of city builders throughout history. When the 1956 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica was published, the entry for Joseph Stalin acknowledged the vast improvements of living conditions, saying, quote, he had found Russia working with wooden plows and left it with atomic piles. That was my section about Soviet industrialization. Now, the next section, it doesn't end there. I go on about the Soviet Union's achievements in terms of the global community, what the industrialization. I talk about the Aswan Dam in Egypt. I talk about the Soviet Union's efforts to oppose racism, including racism in the United States. And I talk about the Soviet Union's aid to developing countries. And I talk about the post-war economic expansion. I did my homework on this book. I really did. And it must be said, anyone who tells you that socialism failed, socialism never worked, you can criticize. I don't understand why they have to lie that strongly. If they were to say socialism had problems, I wouldn't disagree with that. If they were to say socialism had problems with human rights, I would not disagree with that. If they were to criticize the socialist countries for their actual shortcomings, I wouldn't disagree. But when they say that there was no economic progress in the Soviet Union, that is such an obvious lie, right? What I just read you, I was quoting American mainstream publications. I was quoting economics lecturers. I was quoting to you. I mean, it was pretty blatant that the Soviet Union had an economic boom due to socialism in the 1930s. And anyone who tries to tell you that didn't happen is just straight up lying to you. I mean, they are. And there's a lot of lying. Whenever anyone talks about socialism in the United States, there's a huge amount of lying. But, that's not the whole section. I go on to talk about the Soviet Union's aid to the black liberation struggle, the Aswan Dam, industrialization. There's so much deception about the history of socialism, and they get away with it. And you think it's not important. You think, well, we'll just say that, that wasn't real socialism or whatever. Oh, no. It comes up. Every conversation about free healthcare. We can't have free healthcare. Look at what Stalin and the Soviet Union had failed. We can't give people free college. Look at what the Soviet Union did. It comes up in every discussion. Every attack piece on Bernie Sanders brings up the Soviet Union, right? And if you buy into this belief that socialism cannot create economic growth, if you don't challenge it, if that doesn't get eroded, if that doesn't get refuted, we are doomed, because that is the foundation of neoliberalism. It is the founding myth of neoliberalism, that somehow, throughout the 20th century, Russia and China never industrialized and became superpowers. The socialist economic system has never improved people's lives. That's what neoliberalism is predicated on. The only way you can buy into neoliberal economics is this belief that socialism has never raised living conditions, never made life better for people. And it obviously has, despite whatever shortcomings. It's pretty obvious that socialism has had huge achievements in terms of raising living standards, life expectancy, etc. And if people deny that, they're just lying. And liberals and leftists need to get over their cowardice and their fear of just saying, you know what, that's a lie. I'm not, you don't have to defend gulags. You don't have to say that nothing went wrong. You don't have to defend the bad stuff. But to say, to not refute the lie about the 20th century, if you don't challenge it, if you do not challenge those lies, you're not going to defeat neoliberalism. The founding myth of free market insanity in the West is the lie about the 20th century, the myth of the 20th century. So order your copy if you haven't gotten it. This book will blow your mind. A lot more in there about all kinds of stuff. You can get it on lulu.com, you can get it on amazon.com, you can get it everywhere. This is my new book, and it's popular. People have read it, and they love it. I mean, it blows people's mind. It all points to this thesis I have about city builders and vandals. And it's there's a very, very, very long, book-length essay at the beginning of the book, and that's, it's well over 100 pages. And that section I just read you is from that introductory essay. But what else is new, folks? Kinky says Amazon has free shipping. Well, isn't that nice of them, right? Jeff Bezos is shipping books for free. Nick Gallo says the Black Panther Party sold Mao's Little Red Book to help raise funds. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. The Little Red Book and the Black Panthers. And Black Panthers are, you look at their history. They repudiated ultra-left adventurism. They did, the free breakfast program. I have a section in here where I quote and talk extensively about the Black Panthers. I mean, it's important stuff. What else is on people's minds today? I'm hearing the fireworks show out the window. Don't care, whatever. At least it's dark now. It's not just people randomly shooting off fireworks. I think it's the real thing here in Brooklyn. Maybe not, but who knows? Who knows? What else is on people's minds? What else is new, folks? What else is new? What do people want to talk about? What is your favorite place to hang out in New York? Says someone calling themselves Mao. Well, I don't know. I have a lot of favorite spots. I have certain restaurants where I'm a regular, where people know me, and I get around. I like my life here in New York, and I know people, and I'm comfortable. But in terms of hanging out, I'm not really a hanging out kind of guy. I don't go to clubs. I don't, so Mao is actually a common Japanese name for girls. I didn't know that. I don't know much about Japanese culture. Now, Joe Howard is asking me a question about Stalin's book, Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR. I've read it. I feel like there are other people who've read it who get different things out of it than I do. People see it as like a preempting of Khrushchev and all of that. I don't really see it that way. It's kind of a collection of essays that Stalin wrote in the final years of his life. He's talking about why they have commodity production in the USSR and stuff like that. Stalin's writing is particularly interesting. Stalin wrote On the National Question, which was like the definitive work that the Bolsheviks published on the question of what is a nation. Stalin also, he had a series of lectures in the 1920s called The Foundations of Leninism, which really kind of give you an insight into Lenin's ideas. And it's a series of lectures he gave at Moscow University to communists from around the world. Stalin's an interesting one. The interesting thing about Stalin, I think, is that, if you look at the history of Bolshevism, Stalin was very much, he was like kind of the link. It was like the Bolsheviks almost had two ranks, right? You had Trotsky and Lenin and Bukharin and Zinoviev, and these were people from middle-class backgrounds who'd become radicalized at universities. Largely, they spent a lot of their time in exile. They were like the theoreticians of the Bolsheviks. And then you had your rank-and-file, Russian or person in the Russian Empire who was in a labor union or whatever, and was attracted to the Bolsheviks because of their work in the factories and all of that. And Stalin was like the link between the two. Stalin had education. He had gone to seminary school, but he was a factory worker also. And Stalin, as much as he could write and speak, and he was a brilliant writer and a brilliant speaker, Stalin was also, he was an organizer. And he participated in strikes. There was a strike in Georgia where they pulled down the walls of the jail and freed the striking workers who'd been arrested. Stalin was part of that. Oil workers strike, I believe. Stalin was a mass organizer, a rank and file guy in the Bolsheviks. And he was also an intellectual, and he kind of, he was the link between the part of the Bolsheviks that were in exile, writing all the books and theorizing, and he was and the rank and file day-to-day work in Russia. Iskra was the theoretical journal of the Bolsheviks, but Stalin was the editor of Pravda, and Pravda was the agitational newspaper that the Bolsheviks had. And Pravda, most of what was in Pravda was anonymous letters that people would write. And it was, in St. Petersburg or wherever, people would work in a factory and they say, my boss is treating me this bad. Someone else would write in, my boss is making us do this. And it was worker correspondence. And the Pravda newspaper, the daily newspaper the Bolsheviks had that they circulated, which was about factory conditions, that was very much Stalin's baby. I mean, he was the editor of this agitational newspaper that kind of gave a voice to average Russian factory workers. Stalin was very much a mass organizer. He knew how to work with people, right? And his whole life. I mean, there's actually Simon Sebag Montefiore is this right-wing British intellectual, comes out of Oxford, I believe. He gets away with saying some modestly pro-Stalin stuff because he's so conservative. And he wrote a book called Young Stalin. And it's all about Stalin before the Russian Revolution. And you read that book, you get a portrait of a guy who was very much a street tough, who robbed banks, who was a street fighter and a labor organizer, but a guy who was also a poet and was also a theoretician and a writer. It's very interesting, that book Young Stalin. But I don't want this live to turn into we know that the Stalin time was a time of a lot of hardship too, and Yezhovshchina, they call it, the Great Terror, where people, and there were a lot of, you read, even people that are supportive of Stalin will tell you that during the Great Terror, there were a lot of people who ended up in gulags and prison camps who shouldn't have been there. And that these were hard times, and the Second World War, where the Soviet Union was fighting for its life, and the policies, how things got very, very strict and military implemented, and people, the military discipline that was imposed in places like Stalingrad was very, very harsh. And these were, you don't want to romanticize this stuff too much, and we don't want this to be, to turn into, an I love Stalin thing. I mean, there's plenty of hardship and awful things that went on during that time. The Great Terror and the fear and the way people were kind of mobilized, and you can criticize, and this is what needs to be said, you can criticize all you want some of the over-the-top stuff you'll hear, where people say things like Stalin was worse than Hitler and stuff like that. That's absurd. We all know what Hitler did, right? What did Hitler do? He took people on the basis of their race and nationality, put them onto trains and camps, took them to camps where he then gassed them to death. That's what Hitler did. What in the world did Stalin do that was anywhere near that, right? Now, people say, well, he had gulags. Well, the gulags didn't have gas chambers in them, right? I mean, goodness gracious, right? I mean, the notion that Stalin, the man who was largely responsible for defeating Hitler, is somehow worse than Hitler. That's people, this notion that famines, that if there's famines, that is the equivalent of setting up a death camp and gassing people to death. If you're trying to organize a country's agricultural system and you do a bad job of it, or you have problematic policies, you can criticize and you can say it's wrong. But to say that a famine is the equivalent of Hitler's death camps, I mean, that's just. But we don't want to pretend that things, that nothing bad happened. I mean, I would not, and this is what I've said before, and I've said this a million times, we don't understand Lenin and the Bolsheviks, and I've said it before, and it needs to be said again. We don't understand Lenin and the Bolsheviks. A week after the Russian Revolution, they implemented the death penalty for drinking alcohol, because they were being surrounded, and they were facing, the onslaught from the White Army. And they had to have the most ironclad discipline. And they must have executed at least a few people for drinking alcohol, because they had to conscript all the men into the military. And it was a military situation. The harsh conditions, the Russian Civil War that followed the Russian Revolution, where 15 different countries invaded the USSR. The White Army and the Red Army and different factions and villages, and one village slaughtering another village, and we don't understand the hardship that the people of Russia went through during those years. I mean, the Lenin years, the time when Lenin was alive. The hardship, right? And to expect that Stalin and the leadership that would come out of that would be open and free and just practicing total human rights, I think that's a pretty ridiculous expectation, right? Coming out of those circumstances, you're going to have a very authoritarian government. And that's why I don't idealize the Soviet Union. And I don't want to, I refute the lies against them. I will defend their industrialization. I'll say that they achieved huge amounts. But I don't pretend that model is something I would ever want to bring to the United States. I don't want the United States to become the Soviet Union, for goodness sakes. I would never, we're facing different conditions here. And I think that's a problem, and we need to acknowledge that okay, the Bolsheviks, the people of the Soviet Union were in such hardship in following the Russian Revolution, where 15 countries invaded them, where they were facing a blockade, where people were starving to death. And out of that, they managed to become a global superpower. They managed to electrify the entire country. They managed to become the first country in outer space. They managed to wipe out illiteracy. In facing such horrendous conditions, they accomplished so much. What we can take from that is that socialism is not a complete failure. And that socialism, you don't have to have capitalism, right? That even in such harsh circumstances, where they were facing such harsh, extreme blockades and invasions, despite all of that, the people of the Soviet Union were able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and industrialize the whole country, that shows that you can have socialism. Socialism does work, right? When we have socialism in the United States, we're not going to have the same kind of socialism because we don't have the same kind of conditions here. And I would never wish the conditions that faced Russia in the early 1920s on any country in the world or anybody. And out of that, if you think that out of that you're going to get some society where everyone can just do whatever they want and it's totally free, oh no, in those kind of circumstances, you're going to have a very authoritarian regime that's going to come about. Right? And the same goes for China. I mean, if you look at the conditions China was in the 1930s and 40s, if you thought that Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party were going to be able to just take power and be super friendly, nice people after that ugly civil war and the conditions they were facing, oh, no, no, no. There was no question that anything that came out of those kind of conditions was going to be very, very authoritarian and repressive and it was not going to be very ugly in a lot of ways. But did these countries manage to industrialize? Yes. Did they manage to raise living standards by huge amounts? Yes. Did they manage to do real economic miracles like wiping out illiteracy, like building infrastructure? Yes. Yes. Right? Socialism works. Right? And even in those circumstances, socialism achieved the amazing results that it achieved. Right? When we have socialism in the United States, it's going to be an American form of socialism. It's going to be socialism with American characteristics. I don't know what that necessarily means. But socialism will come to the United States based on our own conditions and our own circumstances. It's not going to be an adoption of a foreign system. Right? People always accuse me of being a Deng Xiaoping theorist. Well, I'm not. I think Deng's ideas are interesting, and I think Deng certainly did a lot to raise China and to adjust their socialist model effectively. But Deng Xiaoping theory is a Chinese theory for Chinese conditions. We're going to have some kind of American socialism when we have socialism in the United States. It's going to be a socialism rooted in American culture and American conditions. And that's all it's going to be. We're not going to become a new Soviet Union. We're not going to become a new China. We're not going to adopt the Korean system or the Cuban system. It's going to be an American system. And it's going to be something that develops out of our own struggles to address our own needs and our own situation here in the United States of America. But, does that mean we can't learn from all these other countries that have tried to have socialism? No, I think we absolutely can learn from them. And that's what I take from that. And that's why, again, it's important that we don't write ourselves out of U.S. history. Right? Because the only way we're going to have socialism if it's here. And if we declare that, well, we socialists have nothing to do with America. I've heard people say, we don't consider ourselves to be Americans. Well, if you do that, then don't ever think about having socialism here. Right? If there's going to be socialism here, it's going to come out of the conditions facing U.S. society. It really is. That must be said. It really must be said. Yeah, what else is on people's minds today, right? What else is on people's minds? A lot that we can discuss. What else is new? Now, someone's asking me if, it's this person from Japan, Mao, is asking me about mainstream movies that intentionally or unintentionally promote socialism. Well, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of movies that you can politically interpret, and I like to do that. I like people to take their politics to the movies. Unfortunately, I think a lot of movies nowadays really promote a very, very free market and right-wing message, and even a lot of what they call like Marxist-influenced cinema is actually pretty right-wing. Like the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I was just thinking about that the other day, right? Good music. It's a 1960s cowboy movie. People say it's Marxist, and the director who made it, I think it was Leone, an Italian director, he was in Marxist intellectual circles. I think he was around the Italian Communist Party. But if you watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the only kind of Marxism you can get out of it is that people are very and self-serving and will kill each other for gold, and that the U.S. Civil War was really ugly and not romantic, and that cowboy life was not as romantic as people make it out to be. I don't perceive it as particularly romantic or inspiring, but people say it's Marxist influenced. For a while I was on a kick. I actually enjoyed some of the movies of, there was a French filmmaker named Jean-Luc Godard, who was like a Maoist, I believe. And he wrote, and he did a couple movies. He did a movie called Tout Va Bien, which is about workers who occupy their factory, and it stars Jane Fonda. And it's about workers in France who kidnap their boss and occupy their factory. It's kind of a fun movie, and it points toward kind of the attitudes surrounding the 1968 revolts in France. And it's kind of a fun movie I would recommend. Tout va bien, which means everything's all right in French. I would recommend that if you want to kind of see like kind of a Marxian movie. He also made a movie called La Chinois, which means the Chinese, and it's about a group of students in Paris who are trying to be Maoists, and they're like intellectual middle class students, and I think it's kind of amusing to watch. More than anything, it's kind of a critique of the left, and it points toward the kind of ultra leftist, adventurous tendencies of like middle class, revolutionary intelligentsia folks. But it's amusing to watch too. Jean-Luc Godard's an interesting filmmaker, and he was certainly influenced by Marxism. I must say, the movie that I probably felt the most enthusiastic politically after watching was V for Vendetta. When I was in high school, I was a senior in high school when that movie came out. I hated Bush. I hated the wars. I hated, all this stuff, the anti-Islamic bigotry and all of that. And I went and saw V for Vendetta, which was the Hollywood movie, of the comic book, from the 80s. And my goodness, that movie was just so emotionally powerful, and it was, and it ended with, the credits come up and they play Street Fighting Man by the Rolling Stones. And it was like, wow, I loved it. And there was the whole scene in the rain and all of that. In terms of movies that fire you up emotionally, I really liked V for Vendetta. What's weird is, though, a lot of like libertarian folks really liked that movie too. During Occupy Wall Street, that Guy Fawkes mask was being worn. And, a lot of people see that movie and don't take Marxism out of it. And it's not necessarily a Marxist movie. It's kind of a critique of war and a police state, but it's not really a Marxist film, I wouldn't say. It's not really about the class struggle and economics. But in terms of a left film, it was certainly playing to the left when it came out. And, I really enjoyed it. I really did. Jenny Lynn is saying she loves the passion in that movie. Yeah, it's very Wagnerian almost. It really hits you emotionally. It's a powerful film. Someone's saying they did watch the Godard films. Yeah, I enjoyed the Godard films. I really did. I enjoyed them. There's a lot of movies. When you go to the movies, I always try to look at it from a political perspective. When Dark Knight Rises came out, goodness gracious, that was an anti-communist film, blatantly. It was anti-Occupy Wall Street. It was anti-class struggle. That was an attack on leftism. And every so often they'll make a movie that really is just a straight up, Now, one movie that I think is interesting, that I've watched a number of times, and I've had people disagree with me about, is the movie Reds. I don't know if people have seen that. It won Best Director in 1980, I believe, or 1991. Stars Warren Beatty, and Warren Beatty directed it. And it's a long movie, and it's really the only movie that I know of that's really about American communists. And it's about John Reed, the American journalist who wrote the book 10 Days That Shook the World. And it's about, 1920s left-wing intellectuals in Greenwich Village and the Russian Revolution and their relationship with it. Diane Keaton is in it. She plays Louise Brandt, who was the partner of John Reed. It's a good movie. I would recommend it. It was a very good movie. Though it's very subtly anti-communist. And more than anything, art, they say it always reflects the time period in which it's made, not the time period in which it takes place. And that is so true, because if you watch Reds, it's very much a comment on American communists in the 70s, right? The movie came out in like 1980, 1981, but it's very much a comment on communists, coming out of the 60s and American communists in the 70s and what they were like. And it's a critique of the American communist movement. And there's one time John Reed is in an early formation of the U.S. Communist Party called the Communist Labor Party. And, Louise Brandt, his partner, says to him, "What's the difference between the Communist Party and the Communist Labor Party, except you're in charge of one and he's in charge of the other one?" And it's a comment on the sectarianism And, and the way it ends towards the end of the movie, I don't want to give away too much, but at one point he's in Central Asia, and they have him speaking to a crowd of Muslims, and that's hinting at the, that's basically a reference to the fact that at that time the Iranian Revolution was happening, and people were criticizing American leftists for supporting the Iranian Revolution. Ooh, somebody mentioned the movie They Live, John Carpenter. Yeah, and that movie, interesting, that was Big Bill Haywood who mentioned that. They Live is, it's been, it was mentioned, it was widely understood to be a Marxist film, right? John Carpenter, he took the aesthetics associated with communist groups in the 80s, and he made a movie. And it's a sci-fi movie, and it's a thriller about, like, space aliens having infiltrated U.S. society. But he's doing his best to just play up the kind of Marxist narrative and make a movie out of it. And it's anti-consumerist, and it's pretty good. I recommend They Live. And I really do recommend it in terms of movies that have kind of an anti-capitalist vibe to them. I really recommend They Live. It is very good. It's Roddy Piper. I guess he was a professional wrestler, I guess, and he does it, and he plays this kind of brawny construction worker, and it's a good movie. I really recommend it. Far-right conspiracy theorists love it, as someone mentioned, but John Carpenter has come forward and said, yeah, it's a critique of capitalism, which it very much is. It's 1980s leftism, and it's kind of a leftist narrative imposed on kind of a sci-fi story. And there's even references to, like, global warming in it. They're turning our atmosphere into their atmosphere. And the thing is, in intellectual circles, and Mao is asking me about different things, but in intellectual circles, Marxism has always been there. Well, not always, but especially in the 20th century, it's been there. So a lot of great works of art that are not really necessarily pushing Marxism, you can see, like, the stamp of Marxism on them, because Marxism has always been kind of a big thing among the revolutionary intelligentsia, the artists and intellectuals, and because of that, they always kind of influence, the Marxist influence is always there. It really is. For example, I've often referenced the movie The Magnificent Seven, which is based on a Japanese film called The Seven Samurai, and that's widely understood to be a Marxist analogy. I'm trying to think of other movies that have kind of a Marxist influence on them. They're out there. They certainly exist, and I think a lot of filmmakers and Hollywood folks are influenced by Marxism. There were some straight up communist movies that were made during the not during the Cold War, but during the Second World War, right? When the Soviet Union was aligned with the United States, you got some blatantly pro-communist films. Like, there's a movie called Gung Ho. Have you ever seen Gung Ho? It's a war propaganda film about the U.S. Marines, but it's a bunch of U.S. Marines adopting the methods of the 8th Route Army in China. I kid you not, the 8th Route Army. And you and I know the 8th Route Army was Mao Zedong's Communist People's Liberation Army. That's what they called it during World War II. It was the 8th Route Army. And the movie is this sergeant, he says, yes, I've learned... I joined the 8th Route Army, and I learned their methods of fighting. And he trains a whole group of Marines to use Mao's fighting methods. It's called Gung Ho. It came out during the war. And Gung Ho means all together. It was like a Chinese Communist Party slogan, all together, all for one. And so, it's a bunch of U.S. Marines going around, using Mao's fighting methods. And it's openly in the movie. He says, I learned from the 8th Route Army in China, fighting Japan. That's that. There's another film that came out, Mission to Moscow, which came out during the Second World War, and it's pro-Stalin through and through. It's all about, the Moscow trials, and the Soviet Union is a good friend of the United States. There's a movie called The North Star, and it was written by a Communist Party member, Lillian Hellman, and it's about a Ukrainian village fighting the Nazi invaders. It's very exciting. You can watch that. And these films, it wasn't like innuendo. Like, these movies were like straight up, no question about it, communist, no question about it, right? One thing that was interesting, there's another movie from that time called The Great Dictator, and it's Charlie Chaplin's comedy movie. I actually don't like it. It's like physical comedy, and it's 1940s. It's like, it's not really, compared to what comedy now is a lot more extreme, and it's just kind of lighthearted. It reminds you of Bob Hope. But at the end of the movie, Charlie Chaplin takes the end of the movie to give this like 5-minute communist speech about overproduction and about fascism and machine men with machine hearts. and machine minds, and fight for democracy. But if you listen to it, it's like Popular Front Communist Party stuff verbatim. And Charlie Chaplin was a friend of the Communist Party. He had William Z. Foster come to his mansion to give like campaign speeches, and eventually he got kicked out of the country, of the United States. He lost his U.S. citizenship for being a communist. And at the end of his movie, The Great Dictator, he has this epic, communist speech about overproduction, and I mean it's all there. It's all there. And racial bigotry. Let's do away with greed. Let us do away with national barriers. It's common Popular Front stuff. Interestingly enough, if you watch it, and Hollywood, there were a lot of Hollywood writers. Dalton Trumbo. That's a good movie too. You want to see the life of Dalton Trumbo. There's a movie Trumbo, which is like a fictional account of the screenwriter and Communist Party USA member Dalton Trumbo and his life, and how he was blacklisted, how he went to federal prison for refusing to testify and name names of other members of the Communist Party. That's a pretty good movie. I enjoyed it. Some people thought it was a little bit boring, but I liked it, and it was just kind of a portrait of this filmmaker, Dalton Trumbo. And Dalton Trumbo, the communist filmmaker, he made the movie Spartacus, which is a very good movie. I enjoyed Spartacus, and it's very much kind of a Marxian, interpretation of Spartacus's slave revolt in ancient Rome. But interestingly, he wrote under a fake name, a movie called The Brave One. It's called The Brave One. It was a very low-budget movie that he made, and he wrote it under a fake name because he was blacklisted for being a communist, Dalton Trumbo did, and no one could accept the Oscar. It's the only Oscar that's never been accepted because they read his fake name, he wasn't there, and no one could accept the Oscar. But the movie that he wrote, that he won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay for, but couldn't accept it, The Brave One, is actually pretty good. And it's about a little boy who has a pet bull. And then this pet bull is taken to be in a bullfight. And so he goes to try and rescue his pet bull. And it's an adventure. It's a low-budget movie. I think it was made in Mexico. But it's a low-budget movie, but it's great. I mean, it really is. It's a touching story. It's almost a children's movie, I guess you could say. But it's very sweet. And there's references to the Mexican Revolution in it. It's kind of Marxist. I would say it's kind of Marxist. There's a line about the Mexican Revolution and Abraham Lincoln supporting the Mexican Revolution, and it's, about common working class people in Mexico. It's about a boy and his love for his pet bull, and it's sweet. It's very sweet. I would recommend Dalton Trumbo's movie, The Brave One. The other thing is, Dalton Trumbo, Communist Party USA member, not only did he make Spartacus and The Brave One and these movies that were kind of Marxist, unfortunately, he made a Zionist propaganda film. He made Exodus. Right? He was the guy, they wrote it. They had a communist write it. At that point, you have to remember, at that point, the Communist Party was big supporters of Israel. They stopped being, in 1967 when the Soviet Union and Israel had their official biggest falling out, that relationship ended. But unfortunately, because, the communists were big supporters of Israel, he also wrote this very, very Zionist propaganda film called Exodus. Which is very unfortunate, and really, it portrays Israel being founded as if it was this glorious thing, no reference to the Palestinians and their suffering, and that was, unfortunately, that was the Communist Party perspective. I think that was probably supporting Israel and supporting Israel's creation was one of the biggest mistakes of the global communist movement. It was one of their biggest errors, but I think it was done on the belief that, because at that point, early on in Israel's existence, it portrayed itself as if it was almost a socialist country with the kibbutz and it was like a big socialist commune in the desert, and they were going to share everything and be socialist. Well, settler colonialism never works out that way. It's odd. You can almost parallel it to the Mormons, right? The Mormons were, in a way, as weird as they were in the United States, they were quite progressive at one point, right? I mean, they were anti-slavery to the point they engaged in armed struggle against slavery with the Avenging Angels, they were called. And they were kind of socialistic. They shared everything, and they were, they had the polygamy thing, which is pretty weird. But the Mormons were, kind of progressive early on. But once they got out to Utah, right, and they were killing Native Americans, and they came up with this weird belief that the Native Americans were the lost tribe of Israel, and God had turned their blood red for their sins, so it was okay to kill the Native Americans, and the Mormons, they went from being kind of progressive, socialistic, kind of progressive socialist cult of progressive people that were settling in Ohio and Missouri and places like that. When they became, in the age of Brigham Young, the Mormons very much became a very right-wing settler colonialist group. You go to someone else's country and you're settling on someone else's land and you're persecuting the people there, it affects your mindset. Settler colonialism does a number on you. It really does. And I think that you can compare Israel's history to the history of the Mormons and how they were progressive at one point and ended up being very right wing and repressive and racist. Actually, I think there you go. But I've been going for a while here, folks. What else is on people's minds? What else is new? What else is new? What's going on, folks? I'm gonna go for a little while longer here. It's a holiday. We're just having a chat. I will tell you, everyone who's read the new book loves it. I mean, that's the newest thing. And now, as the new book is available and people are buying it, as the new book is available, I'm now working on the Mysterious Book 2. The Mysterious Book 2, which is, going to be difficult to write. And I'm writing it. It needs to be written, right? People have asked me, Caleb, are you writing an autobiography? No, I am not. Caleb, are you writing a big polemic against the Marxist groups you used to be part of? No, I am not. I'm writing a book about ideas, and that's book 2. And I don't want to say too much about it, but book 2, I don't know when it'll be out. But you've got book number 1 in the set, City Builders and Vandals. And book number 2 is in the works, and I'm working on it. And can't say too much about it, but I'm working on book 2. And it is definitely not an autobiography, and it is definitely not a polemic against some Marxist group I used to be part of or an attack on the Marxist movement. It's not that either. It's something completely different, and I think you'll like it. Now, Mao is asking, will the books be available in audio form? I don't think so. I definitely will be reading different sections of them on my lives. I love to do that, by the way, and people like it when I do that. Just like I read the section on the Soviet Union tonight. I'll read another section some other time. I like to read sections from my books, but the entire thing, I don't think it'll be an audiobook at any point. I don't think I plan to do that. But hey, who knows? If people want it bad enough, right? I mean, maybe it'll happen, right? It depends on how well the book sells. If it really sells and people really want it, it could be possible. But there you go. I'm going to do some more meetups around the country. I'm planning at some point, not going to say when, but in a couple months, I'm planning to go out to the West Coast, right? I am actually planning to go out to the West Coast. I have a lot. I know a lot of you. You know what? Why don't we do this? Okay, just for the heck of it, all of you in the chat, tell me what state you're in. You don't have to tell me your location. You want to be private. But tell me what U.S. state you're in, right? What U.S. state are you in? Because I am thinking about doing meetups around the country. I see Wisconsin. I see Canada. That's not a U.S. state, and that's okay. Canada, Ohio, right? That's where I'm from originally, is Ohio. Right? Utah. Wow. Utah. There we go. New York. Queens. Oh, great. Someone can't say which one. Germany. Definitely not a U.S. state, but glad you're watching. Glad you're on board. But yes, I'm thinking about doing more meetups where we just I get together with all of you. Ohio, says Shonen Rowan. Mississippi, says JT24. Yeah, I haven't been down south in a long time. PA, very good. Pennsylvania. Right? Mexico, very good. That's Proletarian Storm. That's a cool name, too. Another person from Vancouver. Texas. Well, shout out to Texas, right? Come to Brooklyn, says Jeff. Well, I'm in Brooklyn already. I live here in Brooklyn. But yeah. Great. I'm thinking about going out to the West Coast. Because I know there are a lot of folks who watch these lives out in the West Coast. And I haven't been out there. I have some friends out there. And we might have a meetup in the West Coast. I went to Boston. We had a meetup at Boston. I gave a talk at the Center for Marxist Education in Boston. That was a lot of fun. I mean, it really was. And I got to meet a lot of you folks that just kind of watch this here. And I mean, there's a lot of you, hundreds, sometimes, thousands of people. A lot of these lives I do get over 1,000 views. There's a lot of you out there. yeah, I mean, I'd like to meet you all, and I feel like we're kind of a community here. So I'd like to meet you all. I'm thinking of doing a West Coast meetup. I'm thinking of maybe doing something in the Midwest. Got a couple leads on having kind of a meetup, and I hope you all can make it. All of that's in the works. Maybe do some workshops, something like that, because what we're doing here is really unique and special, and I really like it. But if you haven't done it already, not only subscribe, be sure that you subscribe if you haven't subscribed, but also hit that bell so you get updates, right? Now, someone's saying, come to Atlanta. Great. Well, hit that bell. Hit that bell so you get updates so you can see when I make these videos, because I'm doing a lot of videos these days, and I'm having a great time doing them. But yeah, we ought to have more meetups. We ought to have more get-togethers, right? Because, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of you out there, and I'd like to get to know you all better. And, we're doing our thing here. We're all doing the best we can. People ask me, well, I'm doing the best I can. I'm a journalist, and I do my journalism. I do these lives. I write articles. I try to spread truth in a world of lies. Doing the best I can. You know, hey, and there's all this stuff. I'm not here to make any accusations. There's all these theories about YouTube suppressing people. There's all of that, and the algorithms are weird, and all of that. Well, hey, then that's why I need you. I need you all to tweet this out and promote this and stuff like that, because, if YouTube is suppressing us, which I'm not sure they're necessarily doing. I can't totally confirm it, but hey, we gotta push back. We really got to push back. But I want to do some meetups around the country. I want to get together with you all, get to know you all better. Do some workshops and figure out all that. Kinky says we need 1,000 more of you, Caleb. Well, thank you. That is very, very sweet, and I do the best I can. And I would like there to be 1,000 more of me, or 1,000 more people doing the kind of work I do. And that's, we're doing the best we can here. We're struggling. People are speculating about the lurkers. Hey, lurkers are welcome. I don't say anything here on my lives I wouldn't say anywhere else. I'm saying this to the entire world, and, whatever. Don't ask me personal, intimate details about my life, but, hey, we're chatting about politics and socialism and all of that, and, we're having a good conversation here. Create a clone army of Caleb's, says someone named Amamelphilus. Well, I don't think that would be good. I don't think cloning is a good thing. So what? Let them lurk. Yay, lurkers are always welcome. Misery, aka Missouri. Old Gringo is in Missouri. Well, my father's family is from Missouri, right? I went out to Missouri to visit my grandparents many times. Missouri is quite an interesting state, and I was out there. I made like a mini documentary about the Ferguson stuff when that was going on. For Press TV, I believe I made this mini documentary about Ferguson, and I was out there and interviewed people. But I would go out to Kansas City area when I was a kid a lot, because my grandparents were out there. That brings me, okay, all right, this is how what I want to talk about. This is a little lighthearted, but, I was complaining about fireworks earlier in the live, right? And I got to tell you, nowadays, and it's probably good, they restrict things like explosives and all that a lot more than they used to. But when I was a kid in my little town, I would hear older people talk about, like in the 70s, how there were these things that they called cherry bombs. I've never heard of this. They used to be they were like little fireworks you could buy. And people would take these cherry bombs and put them in toilets at the high school in my town. That was like the biggest prank you could do. And they would blow up the toilet with an explosive device. I mean, and that's the thing people used to do. Obviously, you can't do that nowadays. First of all, you'd be going to jail for terrorism for blowing something up. Second of all, I don't think you can buy cherry bombs anymore. But apparently back in the 70s, people used to all buy these things. The other thing that I would hear about from older folks in my little town was shooting potato guns. If you've ever heard of this, potato guns. A device they would rig up with tubing, they'd take a piece of tube, you know what I mean, and they would stuff, they'd have some kind of explosive something in it, and they would shove a potato down the end of it, and then they would shoot potato into cornfields, and they would get together. It was like a recreational activity people used to do, and they would have it like a big tube or a big piece of pipe, and it was a potato gun, right? That was a thing people used to do. I remember it was a big deal. Shout out to Sharon Pitts, by the way. Thank you for the super chat. I'm glad you're enjoying things. Another thing people used to do in my hometown that I thought was interesting, apparently, is people used to actually, and it was a big deal in my town. They outlawed, and I'm sure this is like offensive to call it this. They outlawed what was being called Amish bombs. And I don't know what exactly it was. It was some kind of explosive pop can that people would make, and it was like a fun recreational activity the kids would do. And so they passed a city ordinance: no more creation of Amish bombs. Now, I don't know why they called them that. You know, I'm sure Amish people didn't use them, or maybe they did. I don't know. There was a big thing in my town, a big controversy. Did you hear they just outlawed the Amish bombs? And it was like high kids getting pop cans and making explosives out of them. You know, explosives, I mean, apparently up until the 70s, you used to be able to go to, like a hardware store. I kid you not, a hardware store in the United States and buy dynamite, right? For blowing up stumps, you know? The stumps, I mean, farmers used to take dynamite and blow up stumps, tree stumps and stuff like that. And people used to go to the hardware store, buy dynamite, no problem. Can't do that anymore, for obvious reasons. I think the Weathermen, the Weather Underground organization and their ultra-left adventurous terrorism probably had a lot to do with that. But yeah, I mean, that used to, be a thing. Buy fireworks and explosives at the hardware store, and can't do that anymore, right? And even fireworks, I mean, it's like where you buy them, and it's all restricted, and probably for very good reason. They've restricted a lot of these substances that people, but it used to be, you think about the 70s, you hear the old people talking about the 70s, yeah, people would always throw cherry bombs in the toilets at school, and we'd go shoot potato guns, and we'd be, blowing up Amish bombs, and I mean, this country used to be a lot more tolerant of, you think gun culture is bad now. We used to be totally tolerant of people blowing things up and having explosives, and I mean, it's very strange. Very, very strange. Maybe it's an aspect of U.S. society. The area I grew up in, someone's asking about the Amish. There were a lot of Amish people in the area I grew up in. They had their own schools. They spoke a different language, Pennsylvania Dutch, which is like German or whatever. But there were a lot of them. We'd see horse and buggies going by. And what I remember the most, it's kind of funny, is that, the most common last name among Amish people in my area was Yoder, the German last name, Yoder, Yoder. And so it was a thing that people used to do to make money, right? Is they would rent a big van. And when Amish people would want to go to Cleveland or go someplace, they couldn't have a car because they're Amish. They would pay people to drive them. And so you'd get a big van and you'd fill it up with Amish people and you'd drive to Cleveland for the day. And people called that, in order to make money, they called it having a Yoder toter. Right? And again, you're only if you're from the little part of Northeast Ohio I'm from. Have you ever heard of a Yoder toter? Right? I'm sure a lot of you watching have never heard of that, and it's for the best. But yeah, that was a thing people used to do to make lots of money. Driving a Yoder toter, they called it. Again, that's probably offensive, right? I remember, when I was in college, there was a big thing of Amish hate crimes against other Amish people. There was one group of Amish people that declared this other group of Amish people to be like fake Amish people. I guess they're revisionists or something, right? And so what they did to like stick it to them was they would cut their beards off. Right, so they would like go to their house and tie them down and cut their beards off. And so they declared it a hate crime. It was a hate crime to cut off an Amish person's beard. And so this one group of Amish people that was fighting this other group of Amish people and cutting off their beards, they got arrested and they went to prison for a hate crime against Amish people. I mean, it's weird. The Amish thing is very, very, very weird. Other countries around the world would not tolerate the Amish thing. Other countries, sure. In France, if you yourself wanted to live in the woods with no electricity and running water, you'd be allowed. But if you wanted to have kids and do that, they'd say nope, and children's services would be all over you. They would be all over you. You would not get away with it. But here in the United States, we have this odd tolerance for religious sects. We really do. It's a weird thing about U.S. culture. Because of all the settlers and all of that, we have this weird belief that, hey, if it's your religion, you can do it. Snake handling. Goodness gracious, snake handling. I don't know any other country in the world that if you wanted to start saying, hey, we're all going to hold poisonous snakes and probably one or two of us are going to die every year from doing it. Yeah, snake handling. We don't allow snake handling. I mean, a couple U.S. states, I think there's like maybe one or two U.S. states that still allow the ritual of snake handling. Goodness gracious. Woo. right? God will protect you. Hold the snake, right? And people hold these deadly snakes, and if the snake bites you, well, I guess you just didn't have true faith. That was God punishing you. Oh my goodness, it's a strange ritual. Really is. Really, really is. It started in the 1920s, from what I understand. It was kind of part of the whole like tent revival thing. Somebody had the bright idea of holding poisonous snakes. Goodness gracious. Yeah, and I mean, can you think that the kids aren't allowed to hold the snakes? It's illegal for snake handling with kids, but there's like kids in the audience, and people drop dead in these snake handling rituals. And there's kids in the audience watching people holding poisonous snakes and dropping dead, and they're holding the snake and they're crying, "Oh, Jesus, be with me while I hold this snake." Oh my God, that is some demented stuff. I'm telling you, as much as I want to try to point to the good things about the U.S. society, there's some really weird stuff in the United States. We have a tolerance for some very, very weird things. Yeah, we really do. Um, I mean, people don't realize. Well, I could talk about a million things on this live, but the USA is a unique brand. It is a weird mixture of a lot of different things. And I'll say that. But, hey, agree with me, disagree with me, like me or love me, hate me, whatever. Lurkers, lovers, haters, fans, whatever. I love you all, and I'm glad you're on here. I'm glad you're spending your 4th of July evening with me. I'm having a great time. We talked about everything. So, hey, someone's asking about ancient Rome. I love to talk about ancient Rome. I did lectures on ancient Rome. I have a great lecture, Is America the New Rome, and Will It Fall? But we're doing a great thing here. So if you haven't done it already, tweet out and share this live. Hit the subscribe button. Hit that bell notification so you see when I do something next. I'm glad you're all here. All of you, the folks in Missouri, the folks in Wisconsin, the folks in Los Angeles, the folks in all over the country, the folks here in New York and all around the country. You're all great. I love you all. I'm glad you're with me. I hope you all have a good day. Hope we all learned something together. This is a journey we all go on together. We're all good friends here. Shout out to all of you, the folks in Ohio, the folks in Mississippi. We're all great. We're all good friends here. All my best wishes, and I guess on that note, I'm out.